Wow, great. Great to have you on board, Ken. This is Gary Fowler, and we've got another exciting edition of Silicon Valley Tech and AI with GSD Venture Studios and my incredible guest, Ken Gatz of ProCedar. Ken, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Gary. Great.
So tell me a little bit about it. I mean, you've been a lawyer, you went to school in Albany, you're a lawyer, you're a serial entrepreneur. Tell me a little bit about the journey. What made Ken Ken?
Okay, great. So a lot. So, I graduated University of Albany, as you mentioned. I ended up going to law school. When I came out of law school, I had a tech background going into college, and I became an English major for some reason. And but came back to technology, and so went into the securities industry, quantitative trading, built technology platforms, on Wall Street. Then founded a company in life science tools and bioinformatics, and grew that. And then during that journey, which brought me to ProCedar, I realized that two things. Number one, that large corporations had been changing the way that they innovate, and their research and development went from an internal growth engine to accessing external technologies and partnering and bringing those in. And I saw that happening in pharma. The second thing that I saw was that those processes were very manual and paper-based and not reported on. And so ProCedar was a system that was designed and has been built in order to facilitate the relationships between those large corporations that are seeking innovation and the early stage, university stage, IP and startups that are really the source of this new innovation.
That's great. And so you had this journey. You started a company called Bioreclamation, and when did you start that? In early 2000s sometime?
Yeah. Yeah, actually, certain events, we've got something going on right now, right, with this pandemic. And sometimes these things that you see, they're disruptive to the way that industries function, and they're also disruptive to people's lives. People are moving to different places, and lives are changing as a result of these events. And so for me, I left, I was in-house counsel at a proprietary trading firm on September 11th, 2001. It was actually at the closing for my home with my wife on that day, our first home. I couldn't get back to the office in the city. And my brother and I had been talking for a while. My father was a researcher, and we'd been talking a while about how personalized medicine was going to change things over, the next 20 years from 2001 forward, right? That these medicines would become much more granular based on the specific genetics and background and demographics of the populations that these medicines were serving. And so we thought about how could we, not develop a medicine, but take part in that revolution. And so we came up with the ability to customize the controls and the reagents that were being used in these clinical trials, as well as developing the networks to be able to access patients and patient data under IRB and confidentiality, to leverage that information within the drug development process. Mm-hmm. That is Bioreclamation. Eventually became BioIVT. We expanded into all different types of reagents and clinical trial research.
So that was a journey going from being a lawyer to being the CEO of a company. Was it hard to go from being a lawyer to doing that? Well, what was the journey like?
No, I will tell you, as a lawyer, everyone thinks lawyer, right? I went to law school. I always practiced in business. And so a lot of, I wasn't really necessarily a litigator. I did have a couple of arbitrations and cases like that. But for the most part, I was involved in advising CEOs and other business leaders on the regulatory aspects, contractual aspects, and financial aspects of their own businesses. And so actually, as I was performing those things, I kept saying to myself, well, why am I continuing to do this and helping out and helping these other businesses grow? That's great. I'm learning so much. Where is there going to be an opportunity, a window for me to jump in and actually do something for myself? And, it was that, September 11th, 2001, where I was like, you know what, here's an opportunity. things have changed. Let me grab this, and we have an idea. Let's move forward with it. The transition for me was actually more natural. I feel, I'm an entrepreneur at heart. Working in a large law firm definitely didn't agree with me. This does. I wake up every day. I'm excited about what I do.
And so when you grew the company, how big was the company? You sold the company, correct?
So we exited to a private equity firm in 2010, and then again in 2013. It's still backed by a private equity firm. So we did, sell majority interest of the company. We grew it from 2001 to 2010. Actually, I would say that the real growth happened in the last 5 years of the company as the business model really started kicking in. So at that time it was about a $30 million revenue company.
Wow, that's great. So now you fast forward to where we are today with ProCedar. How did you come up with the idea of ProCedar? Where did that come from?
Yeah, so going back to what I said earlier, it really came out of the previous experience where I saw pharma. We saw some of the growth of we served both biotechs, academia, as well as large pharmaceutical companies with our products and services. And we began to see a shift of resources within pharma from internal R&D, deploying that research capital externally to earlier stage, more agile companies that could explore these different therapeutics. And so what we saw there was, a very strong combination of the agility, the innovation, and the drive of these smaller startups and platforms that were experimenting with new technologies that maybe would be hitting bureaucratic hurdles or stuck in some department within a large pharma company. And so they had found that the nexus between the small companies as well as these large pharma companies was a great dynamic, that the smaller companies were creating these new innovative platforms, diagnostics, therapeutics, and the big pharma companies had the distribution, the sales forces to distribute the drugs once they were brought to market, as well as the regulatory bandwidth in order to navigate the FDA approval process.
Wow, interesting. So what's happening? Tell us a little bit about ProCedar. So what kind of companies are you dealing with? What's the future look like? How are you going to dominate the world with ProCedar?
Yeah, so our mission at ProCedar is to connect the supply and demand for innovation. And so that's a very big challenge, right? And so what we needed to do was, first, we needed to start with the concept of not just building a network, but building a network in which there was inherent value in the technology other than just networking, right? Where it was being utilized for the actual purposes within each market participant, as well as connecting those market participants. So that's what we built over the first few years. We began with the connections between startup companies and early stage investor networks. So our first deployments, which I call minimal viable market, was these angel groups. So the largest angel groups in the United States use ProCedar as their infrastructure, right? So we're infrastructure for innovation. We don't fund companies ourselves. We don't get resources from those other companies. We're basically the technology that's white labeled behind these deal flow operations, portfolio management, deal sourcing, and deal collaboration. And it's deployed differently into each of these different environments. So an angel group, an angel network, right, will utilize a different configuration of these technologies that we've built than will a startup, as well as a law firm or a large corporation or a university. And so, but we've built these different components of the platform and the things that everyone needs, whether it be task management, document management, workflow, notifications. All of these pieces are very, very rapidly configurable, not only to each different market participant and the way that they work, but even within those sectors. So one law firm will work differently than another. We can rapidly adapt to the way that they work and map those processes directly to the technology.
Okay, so Ken, do me a favor for the audience. We have startups from all over the world that listen to the broadcast. Can you walk it through? Let's say there's a startup that's located in Dubai. How would they interface with you, and what does it do for them? And what's the process look like?
Yeah, and so they really wouldn't interface with us, right? And it's almost like if you're doing a contract, let's say, with another company, you wouldn't say that you're both interfacing with Microsoft Word, right? So we're that infrastructure behind it. So startups that are accessing angel networks, corporate venture firms, law firms, they're coming in through our technology.
So they wouldn't go to you directly. They'll go to those angel networks. So the angel networks are the ones that are really streamlining the process, and this is on the back end. The startup would never see anything.
Well, no, they would actually. So they would see it, but they would see it only. So what happens is when a startup does come into one of these ecosystem market participants, it'll actually create a startup site for that company, and they can manage their relationships with the other market participants from that site. The documents that they're sharing with those people, whether they be funding sources, whether they may be licensors of their technology and commercial agreements that they're developing with them. And so it gives them one focal point to manage all of these other industry partners and the relationships through the network. One thing I will say is that we did just launch what's called corporateventure.com, which is our first dedicated, let's call it destination site, where it is a ProCedar owned site, where we're utilizing our own technology, our own branding around the corporate venture industry to centralize the deal flow coming in that we can now fan out to all of our corporate partners. And maybe just switching gears a little bit, we're actually using artificial intelligence to smartly route and recommend certain companies based on their size, the amount of funding rounds they have, the industry sectors they're in, their management teams, to the appropriate market participants who are searching for those different types of attributes and companies within their deal flow, as well as technologies that those companies are developing.
Interesting. So what about like Carta has like data rooms, and how do you compare with like a Carta? Where do they fit in your universe?
Yeah, so Carta is a partner, right? And so Carta does, right now they're doing one thing really well, which is cap table management. Our cap table is located on Carta. We're not in the cap table management business. We believe that Carta will be the winner in that space, and that's not a place where we want to compete. Carta is a partner of ours, and so we don't do cap table management. We do have all the documents, the information of the investors related to particular companies, which they can run reports on and give to Carta in order to build out their cap tables, but we're not in the cap table management business.
Interesting. So in terms of the market, where do you see the market going? In terms of, obviously, when you have angel investors, I mean, the key is how do you manage the information they're getting from the startup? And how do you make it a better process? And it sounds like you're using artificial intelligence to identify deal flow for them, correct?
Yes, and the deal sourcing, right?
So so your idea is to create a huge data bank of incredible amount of startups, and then depending on the focus of the VC or the corporate venture, they could actually find those kind of companies in your network.
Sure, that's definitely one piece of it, yes.
So tell me a little bit about some of the other pieces that could be interesting. Let's say we have a corporate venture arm of a large Japanese company, Docomo. How could they use you to be able to source deals in Japan?
Yeah. Well, when we thought about what would corporates need to connect with new technologies, whether they be startups, whether they be patents, whether they be commercial agreements that they're entering into with their partners, we broke it down into first principles and said, okay, these are the three things that they're going to need. Number one, we need a very large data set of all of these different companies, their underlying technology, their funding sources, their team members, the history of what they've done, how they've grown. And so that's number one. So we have a very large data set, which is searchable, through advanced criteria to find not only companies that you're targeting, but also potentially competitors in the space to get comparables if you're looking at a particular sector and kind of landscape out a sector. That would be the first thing that they would do, right? So a company like NTT Docomo would say, Well, we're looking at, let's say, the virtual reality space in these types of applications, maybe in gaming, right? And we want to know all the market players in there. And we want to be able to document them and do our own research, not specifically on the companies themselves, but how do these companies relate to us? How do they relate to the mothership? Meaning, which ones are going to fit with our internal R&D, our tech stack? Maybe we're doing things in-house that maybe conflict with what they're doing, and try to narrow down who the partners are, right? Which brings in the second piece, which is business process management, business process automation, and and basically the movement of these opportunities through the organization and collaboration on those opportunities. So that means subject matter experts within these organizations logging in at certain points in the workflow, and opining and getting data from them, really building the knowledge base, right, in that second piece around, which are the best opportunities, not just for the deal team, which is important to structure the transaction, but with really the strategic business units that are going to be leveraging or integrating with this technology. They need to have their say. Otherwise, you're not going to source the right deals. You're not going to perform the right due diligence. And when it comes to integration, you're going to have a lot of problems. And whether that's POCs that you're integrating, whether it's M&A activity, which is another area that we address with the technology, or whether it's investments and commercial agreements that are being developed, you need to have everybody on the same, not only working from the same page, but working from the same playbook, we like to say, and that everyone's bought into these things before they brought in, right? That these companies are notorious for acquiring these companies and then kind of, the integration goes badly. And so knowing which companies, having better targeting up front as to which companies are going to be a fit by leveraging the internal knowledge base of the organization itself, and getting that buy-in at the time that's before the transaction is done, so that when you go to integrate it, you've already answered a lot of these questions. A lot of the questions that need to be answered are already done in due diligence, not after when the integration is happening. And you're kind of planning, you're aiming before you shoot. And that's a big part of it. And then the third piece of this is the reporting, right? Being able to visualize all this activity. What is NTT Docomo's relationship to the external ecosystem in which it relates, right? How do we relate to gaming? How do we relate to media? Where do we have fit? And so building this knowledge base of putting these opportunities through the platform over time will build this knowledge base of information, and the reportability and data that's collected during these processes creates a wealth of knowledge to take action by the C-suite.
Wow, that's interesting. So what is, I mean, if you look at it today, it's like you got Crunchbase, you got these other sources out there, in terms of streamlining this process and also having Crunchbase, how does it, I know today for me with Crunchbase, I look at Crunchbase and you can look at the companies, get a picture, but it sounds like you're putting real processes behind it.
Yeah, so I would say the data is really, so you're looking at Crunchbase, I'm looking at Crunchbase. Crunchbase is a partner of ours. We have an enterprise license Crunchbase data. PitchBook is a partner of ours. And then we also have our own research customized that we're doing as well. And so they're great. They're great partners. But when you look at PitchBook, Gary, at a particular company, you're going to see the same information that I'm going to see. When you look at a company on Crunchbase, you're going to see the same information that I see, right? And so that's a base to start from, right? The real richness of information that can be gleaned that's actionable by these corporations is, how do I relate to that company that you see and that we're both seeing, and how do you relate to that? And those are different things, right? Mm-hmm. And so the ability to actually, it's not as much about the company, the startup or the technology, but how does the mothership relate to that? Are they duplicating efforts that they have in-house? Does this solve an age-old problem that they have, and this is the magic bullet? Mm-hmm. Are there competitors, are the corporation's competitors engaging with this company where maybe they need to take it off the market, right? So that is really the importance and the differentiator, is being able to develop the internal information on the relationship between these companies, not just the information on the companies themselves. That's just the initial point.
Interesting. So if you got, let's say it's a XYZ company and it's defined, Docomo goes out, looks at it, said, this is really interesting. This company's really interesting. The kind of information they can get out of it, can they look at, does it bring the competitors? Does it look like where they fall in the landscape? does it, so it's analyzing all that data so you can see what kind of fit. Does it look at what you want in terms of a company, what kind of parameters you want or need? And does it, talk about best fit?
Yes. So basically, on a site-by-site basis, the algorithms that have been developed and are continuing to be expanded and configured, they basically look at within each corporation at their strategic objectives, right? There's a lot of information in that collaboration process, and it's using sentiment analysis. A lot of, I don't want to go too into detail, but it's looking at all the attributes that are happening within the collaboration process to smartly recommend additional companies from the data set.
And so on one side, you set the parameters. On the other side, is it used unsupervised AI, semi-supervised AI? Is it actually going out on its own and saying, hey, listen, continually understanding what kind of companies could be interesting for a venture arm?
So yes, it is going out on its own and sourcing that information. It does get feedback from the users, both in sentiment as well as movement of those deals through processes in order to glean information as to which ones are going to be successful.
Wow, I love that. That's really cool. You've taken away a lot of the hard work. You've made it really better, more surgically precise. Like you said before, it's kind of aim. You're using a hired assassin approach, direct hit, sniping it to be able to get to. That's great. Well, people got to be buying this, grabbing this out of your hands, as Bob Dorsch says. I mean, this is really cool stuff. How is it? How's business? How's it growing?
Business is good. It's growing. One of our challenges is that by trying to create a market, right, you got to generate that flywheel effect. And so you've got different selling motions, right? You've got early stage accelerators, seed funds, angel networks, universities on the supply side of the innovation, right? And then you've got these large corporations that are looking for that. It's the demand for this innovation, right? And so ultimately we're trying to create that network effect, and we see it happening, but we're trying to scale it rapidly. And I think it's working well. We're deploying it, and we're having successful deployments across all different market participants, in addition to intermediaries or service providers like law firms. Okay, and so creating this network around all of these private transactions is a very valuable thing as well. And so I would say the biggest challenge is that those two types of sales are very different, right? And so you've got, when you talk about selling to a corporate venture unit or a private equity firm, you're talking about an enterprise sale. You're talking about a 3 to 9 month sales cycles, security reviews, SOC 2 certification, which we are, enterprise grade, technology, integration into, things like Microsoft Active Directory and single sign-on systems with the corporation, pushing data to and pulling data from the corporate systems in order to visualize this information in conjunction with the external information as well as the information from the corporation to get a good view as to the nexus. And then on the other hand, you've got these the higher scale, right? You think about who has corporate venture units, right? Let's just say Fortune 2000, right? So we know there's 2,000 of those, right? I mean, there's probably 5,000 universities and colleges alone in the country, and probably multiple deployments within each of those. Now you've got angel groups, you've got seed funds, you've got VC funds, so those are very different selling motions, different cost structures. And so somebody always asks me, like, how did you solve that chicken egg scenario? And is it the chicken or is it the egg? And I think one of the things that we realized both in my previous company in Bio.ai, which was pharma and patients and patient data and clinical trial sites, it's not chicken or egg. It's a little chicken, a little egg, a little more chicken, a little more egg, and you just keep going at it that way, and it slowly starts building on itself. We're seeing that building now.
No, that's great, fantastic. No, I mean, so if we talk about the U.S., but does it have boundaries? Are you in different languages, or are you having VC arms from around the world, or are they coming in? How does that look for global expansion?
Yeah, so we built it's in every language. And it's in every currency, so it's configurable per site, for language, per user, time zones, currencies, And so we are deployed worldwide. I will say our main focus is the United States. There's enough business here and we happen to have the benefit of being here in both Silicon Valley and New York. So two very big centers for innovation. And so we as a fairly small company, our main focus is here.
So what are your plans for the future? What about exits? I mean, where are you going to go with it? How far is ProCedar going to go?
Well, our goal is to really be the de facto system for transactions between private securities, market participants, right? And so that expansion, we started in and are currently still, focused on what's been an area for growth for us, right? So we want to go, in order to develop market network effects or, demand side increasing returns, where being part of the network as that network grows becomes more and more valuable, right? Startups and this massive digital transformation that we see happening before our eyes on a day-to-day basis, that's where a large amount of transactional activity is happening. So we want to put ourselves in that kind of stream of commerce and where the most volume and velocity of transactions is happening. That's where we're best focused. And so we've been focused there. But we are seeing interest and deployments in real estate transactions. So really any type of private transactions where you have multiple parties that need to come together on a platform to have operating efficiencies to transact, that's where you're going to find us.
Oh, that's really interesting. Interesting. So you're tying it together. It doesn't really matter. Any kind of transaction that's out there that, where you've got a lot of data, I mean, you can fit into any one of those models. Interesting. So you talked about the digital transformation, Ken, and how that has had an impact on the business. What is it? How big of an impact do you think it's having right now? Let's say pre-COVID, December last year till, now. I mean, what kind of how big is that impact? How much? Because it would seem like what you have is, you take care of a lot of the handshaking and, those kind of the deals where you have to be in front of people. What is it like?
Yeah, I mean, there's a huge transformation going on, right? I mean, and it's been going on, right? I mean, that really is, why we're positioned here is that the transactional activity and why are corporates investing in startups? Actually, when I started this, people asked me, why would a large corporation want to invest in startups? And now it's like, okay, yeah, now I get it, right? And so, you've got when the chasm between big, large corporations that are very good at focused on a business model and pursuing and prosecuting that business model, forward. And they're very geared and tooled to do that, not only both in their operations, but in their culture, right? And then you have this other segment, right, of early stage founders, right, many of which
right.
myself included, right, who would never work in a large corporation, who want to control their own destiny, who want to be risk-taking, who want to take their ideas to market and don't care that people are going to say, no, don't do that. And they're going to do it anyway because they believe that they're right, and many times they are. That's a very big chasm, right? And so, since really, I would say 2010, that chasm continues to grow, where technological change, right, continues to increase at a more rapid and exponential pace, on and on and on, right? We talk about Moore's law, but Moore's law is specific to, semiconductors. We're talking about, a law of, when you look at AI, even if you just take that on a day-to-day basis, this thing is growing exponentially into our lives in an unstoppable way. And so as that, chasm continues to not only be there, but continue to grow, more and more there is the need to connect those market participants who are increasingly divided, right? And so the value of bringing them together becomes more and more important.
Well, and there's a lot more data, right? The amount of data that happens every year. I know when we did Yva in the beginning, there's massive amounts of data and we can't deal with it, right? The average person has about 300,000 items just in their personal cloud. We can't imagine if you're a venture capitalist and you got to go out and look at all these PowerPoint presentations and all this stuff coming at you. How in the world can you manage it? So, we say in 1996 we're 257,000 websites on the internet. Today, our personal cloud of each one of us are about 300,000 items and doubling every year. So if you're a venture capitalist or you're a university, how in the world can you manage that amount of data? It's impossible. So, it's incredible what you're doing. I really love it. I think that the platform that you have is, going to dominate the planet. I don't know. Are there competitors out there today? Do you have competitors that are doing what you're doing, or what's a competitive landscape look like?
Yeah, I would say in certain sectors there are industry-specific CRMs that are trying to be repurposed as deal management platforms. I would say where it's very differentiated is the network, right? And so what we've seen, whether it be Facebook or LinkedIn, that if you can be successful in building network effects and generate demand-side increasing returns, those things build on themselves. And so that's really our main focus, is figuring out how we get these different market participants to engage and transact through the platform. In that area, you look at something like a LinkedIn, right? LinkedIn is a network; it's very successful, but you don't transact on LinkedIn, right? ProCedar is not only a network like LinkedIn, which is really for professionals, right? ProCedar is a network of businesses, of corporations and startups that actually are utilizing the inherent value. They're connecting with each other like you would on a LinkedIn, but they are actually transacting through the platform because there is inherent value that they utilize within the platform as their system of record for the transactions with which they are conducting.
Yeah, there's all kinds of issues with compliance and things too. You solve a lot of those challenges, right? You're keeping the documents, and they know what they have. That's great. I love it. So Ken, we're just about out of time. What I want to say is, one is final words for the audience, and how can they get a hold of you? What's the best way? Where can they find you? And any closing thoughts?
Sure. Well, hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn a lot. My email is ken@ProCedar.com, and it's PROSEEDER.com. And that comes from our roots of, starting out. We're focused on a couple of areas right now, specifically impact investment. We're seeing as something that our team is really interested in pursuing, and that goes for diversity as well as sustainability and life sciences, which is my background. So our team is pushing forward with that. I think, this dynamic that we see of technological change and the growth of that, the exponential growth of that is amazing. And we're living in an amazing time right now. It's also a dangerous time where these tools, and these technologies can be used for nefarious purposes. So as well as, and that's intentionally, but then also, there's institutional biases that have existed within humans, right, that are being imputed to these algorithms. And so I think it's critically important to be able to use these technologies for the power of good, okay, and to be aware that they can be used for bad, and to make sure that we strike that balance and that we control them in ways that we're directing them for useful purposes that are beneficial to humanity for the future.
All right, sounds great. So if you do an impact investing and you're a corporate arm or you're a VC, talk to Ken. He's got the right product at the right place at the right time. And Ken, love what you're doing. Really appreciate you coming on to my show, and keep going. It's incredible. Thank you so much for coming today.
Thanks for having me, Gary.
Yeah, take care of yourself.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.